Welcome to Module 5, and I apologize for that last module that went on longer than I had hoped it would. So this module, if I go on that long, I'll cut it into two different lectures so you can break it up, make it easier for yourselves. So we've talked over the first few modules about stress and what that looks like, how it affects human beings. And the last module we talked about how stress impacts first responders in a theoretical level, what some of the impacts might be from stress. In this module, I want to go through some real-world, real first responder stressors, incidents, and reactions to those stressors to help you gain a deeper understanding about the culture of first responders and the amount of stressful situations that first responders may experience that we don't ever hear about. So just as a baseline, as an example, in my 20-year career, we did probably about 6,000 to 7,000 calls for service in a year, which over a career comes out to about 18,000 to 20,000 calls for service. That's house fires, car accidents, car fires, medical calls, sick kids, sick older people. And through that, most of those are not what we would see on TV as critical, as plane crashes, as large-scale shootings, as fires where lots of people are trapped or are killed. Most of these are much smaller scale, dealing with one person or one family or one child. But those build up, those add up over time. And whether you're talking about a firefighter fighting structure fires, or an EMT or a firefighter EMT dealing with people in cardiac arrest or any one of a number of other medical conditions, talking about the military deployed in areas where they need to be concerned about their well-being. Police officers. These are the daily stressors that first responders experience. And remember, as I said, the first goal that first responders are taught is to get through the day, to go home in one piece. But these are the situations that intervene in first responders' days, or in first responders being able to go home. And these are the stressors that build up over time and lead to the stress reactions, the maladaptive reactions that we talked about in the last module. So let's take a look at an incident that happened in 1987. This is the baby Jessica incident, where an 18-month-old girl fell down a well shaft that was barely big enough for her to fit into. The baby was at the bottom of the well shaft, about 20 feet deep, and she was stuck there for nearly 60 hours, so 2.5 days.
We interrupt our regular program schedule to bring you a special report from ABC News. Here is Ted Koppel.
For the past 48 hours, Jessica McClure has become, I guess, the most famous 18-month-old child in the world, stuck at the bottom of a 22-foot well in Texas. You're looking at a live shot of what I hope will very soon, within the next few minutes that is, be one of the happiest scenes that anyone in America can hope to see. It looks as though, and we have been hearing such predictions now for so long that I don't want to raise too many hopes, but it looks as though Jessica McClure is about to see an end to her ordeal. We're going to switch now live to my colleague, Mike Von Fremd, who has been standing by in Midland, Texas for the past 2 days. Mike?
Ted, the feeling is absolutely electric. This is the moment, they hope the moment, that they've been just dreaming of. There are, we believe, 2 paramedics down in the hole. They are receiving instructions from a pediatrician up above. The little tiny stretcher is down inside, and we're praying that Jessica is going to come up and that she's going to be okay. Now, Ted, I have seen smiles from people who are closest to the hole, and that certainly is a good sign.
All right, Mike. Ironically, in this age of telecommunications, sometimes those of us who are more than 1,000 miles away from the scene are closer to the action than those of you who are literally just 50 feet from the scene. You are, what, about 50 feet from the action, 50 feet from the wellhead?
I'm 50 feet. I'm right in back of that giant green structure that they initially used to drill the hole that's parallel to the well that Jessica fell into. I'm about 50 feet away, and I've got to tell you that the crowd is just holding its breath. The anticipation in this little town is overwhelming. They have come out, they have supported, they have dug night and day, they've brought food, they've prayed, they've set up a trust fund because this family does not have any health insurance, and they have just come out for little Jessica, I guess like people around the country are. This is a unique situation, a tiny little girl stuck 20 feet underground. It just makes everyone's heart go out, and this town's heart is very big right now, and they are, I just have to say it again, they are just dreaming of this moment, hoping that she's going to be okay. And we've been led to believe that she's cried a lot, and that when they tickled her earlier today, she giggled back a little bit. That was at noon. That's quite a while ago. And but with the smiles I can see on some of the faces over there, Ted, I think this is going to be the moment soon.
All right, Mike, bring us up to date a little bit on precisely what has been happening over the past 48 hours. First of all, is it 48 hours? How long has she actually been down that well, and how did she get there in the first place? Do we know now?
Well, it was 10:30 on Wednesday morning, and the details are still a little bit sketchy. Her mother runs a small child daycare. She had about between 5 to 10 children that she was looking after. She said to go to answer the phone, and when she came back, Jessica was down at the bottom of the hole. It was shortly after that they dropped microphones down and were able to hear the very first cries, and they thought that she was going to be brought out soon. I remember following the story the day after, and we were told continually, the next few hours. Well, as you know, those hours have just gone on and on, because when they drilled, they found the hardest darn rock I guess you could ever find. And hearing the child cry while you're drilling for 2 days, more than 2 days, is just absolute agony. And the young parents would come out and they'd call down the hole, and Jessica would respond and sometimes say, "Mommy." Sometimes she had some moments where she was feeling okay. She even sang nursery rhymes once. The past hours have been mostly crying. And the overwhelming thing about this is she has had absolutely no nutrition throughout all this time. No food, no water, because they simply couldn't see enough of her to get anything to her.
And yet, you told me that someone got close enough to her a few hours ago to be able to tickle her, which is actually really not to tickle her, but just to see if the legs were still receiving nerve impulses. Would they not have been able to give her a little something to drink or something to eat? Was there also a health concern perhaps that she had some internal bleeding?
Yeah, well, the concern is that if she needs any surgery, and she is going to be taken to the city hospital immediately from here, there's an ambulance waiting. If she needs any surgery, someone about to have surgery should not have any liquids or food in their stomach, and that's what the doctors have been telling us, in addition to the fact that they couldn't get any nourishment to her if they were very close to rescuing her, and they thought that they were close all day long. When they're close, they didn't want to put anything in her stomach should she need more work.
All right, those of you who have just tuned in, let me point out to you that you're listening to the voice of Mike Von Fremd from Midland, Texas. The pictures that you are seeing are, I suppose, as self-explanatory as any pictures can be. A bunch of exhausted volunteer workmen who for the past, and I've been saying 48 hours, it's coming on 58, 59, close to 60 hours. The little 18-month-old Jessica McClure has been down at the base of that well. And for much of those 60 hours, these men that you're seeing there, these rescue workers, and not only is their work volunteer work, but also much of the equipment that has been brought in has been voluntarily brought in. I don't think anyone is charging for this. It's not the state that has brought the equipment in. These are private individuals who brought their equipment. And let's face it, this is oil country in Texas. Some of the gear that you would need for drilling a quick hole down into the ground. And while we are waiting right now for Jessica McClure to be brought to the surface, it might be a good idea just to quickly show you a schematic that our artists have drawn up that will show you what has been happening over the past 2 days. They have dug that what is an orange-yellow shaft that you see toward the right center of your screen. They have dug that parallel shaft to the well, which is there on your left, only 8 inches wide at the top, 14 inches wide, where Jessica McClure is at the bottom of that well. She's roughly 20 to 22 feet down. And they have deliberately drilled down and under the well for fear of collapsing that well shaft. I'll tell you what, let's go back to the live shot now that you have a sense of what it is you're looking at. The man in the red T-shirt there lowering down something into that rescue shaft that has been drilled. And the key work, the painstaking work, has not been drilling the vertical shaft, but rather cutting through the horizontal area from one shaft to the well shaft in an effort to get Jessie out of there. We have literally been hearing, I know I've been hearing on radio and television reports, as all of you have, since yesterday afternoon, that they were only a few inches away and just literally minutes away from rescuing Jessie. This, I think, is a little bit different. I think finally they're there. They are within minutes of bringing her up, but quite clearly they don't want to run the risk of rushing the procedure now and hurting this little girl who, after all, has had one leg, as it's been described to us, scissored under the other from her initial fall. And she has been wedged in such a tight area that she has been unable to get that leg underneath the leg that she is still able to move out from under. So if you can imagine just the pure discomfort, quite apart from the fall, the pure discomfort of being stuck in a tiny, tiny area with one leg wedged under the other, no food, no drink for almost 60 hours now. But as I say, her ordeal is almost over. Mike, tell us a little bit now about some of the people who have been working on this rescue effort.
Well, they are people that live in the neighborhood. They're people that just saw a family in need. And the interesting thing is they all could relate to it. Most of the families around here have little children. And what came through in the conversations I'd have with them while waiting is, my God, that could have been my child down there. I guess it's every parent's worst fear. And if Jessica is all right, and we pray that she is, she's certainly going to be remembered for one thing, and that probably will be to make parents think again. I mean, my goodness, in the blink of an eye, Jessica has certainly proved that the toddlers can get into and will get into about anything. I mean, an 8-foot hole, 20 feet in the ground just seems impossible. She's 18 months old, but she did it. Agony was down there so long. And in agony was down there so long. I must tell you, in cutting in to get her out, they brought a spectacular piece of machinery in here. It was actually flown in courtesy of Federal Express. It's a water gun, and it's said to be able to put up between 35 and 40,000 pounds per cubic square inch of pressure, enough to actually cut through 6 inches of steel. And that's what it took to get through some of this rock. The people that were drilling it said it's the toughest stuff they've ever seen. They would continually have to sharpen the drill bits. It would make all of them dull, even the diamond-studded ones dull. But it was this water drill that really helped break it up, and after that was down for about 2 hours, they came up, and a few of the people that ran it came over to the cameras and said they're going to be able to get her out pretty soon, and it looks like they were right.
Mike, what happened to the water? You must have had massive quantities of water down there.
Well, it's a pretty sophisticated machine that came along with a water suction device, a giant truck that sucked the water out just seconds after it was spewed down the well. And that, of course, is very necessary because they didn't want to, with that sort of pressurized water, there was concern that it could damage Jessica. And there is fear. I mean, this child has been down there so long. She's been rattled around so much. It's that you can feel the ground shake. There's these giant diesel engines all around, and this little 18-month-old child has had to endure all this. And what's remarkable is she's been able to endure it without food, and all the doctors that have reported to us say from what they can hear, and they've had very sensitive microphones listening to her, that she has sounded the entire time like a child that still has strength. She's not dehydrated. That sounds almost impossible, but they don't seem to think she's suffering too much because of that. And let's hope she's got some more left in her.
Mike, we're looking at a close-up shot of one of the rescue workers who just had his fist held up. I assume that what he is doing is signaling someone who is working a winch as to when to stop and when to start that winch up again to pull up. I guess there is a rescue worker down at the bottom of the shaft right now. Did they, do you know, because I didn't see them, they have this little stretcher that they were going to lower down into the shaft so that they could immobilize Jessica when they brought her up. Did they, in fact, lower that down into the shaft, or are they going to try it without the stretcher?
Yes, we're told they did lower it. It's right, my view is slightly blocked from that. I must tell you, Ted, that when you're looking for a child to come out of this, and you see a stretcher there, you know when that stretcher moves, the child's going to come out. So I've spent 2 days keeping track of that stretcher, which was in front of an ambulance, and it's tiny. It reminds you of how small the toddler is, and her neck is going to be put into a brace. This is would be done with any trauma case. They don't know what kind of condition she's in. She speaks mostly baby talk. She does know a nursery rhyme or two, but she was unable to tell them what sort of condition she was in, so they're not going to take any chances. They're going to strap her to this stretcher. Her neck is going to be put in a brace, and as we mentioned before, she's going to be taken immediately to the hospital with her parents, and let's hope she's going to be found to be okay there.
I should point out to our viewers that Mike Von Fremd and I are talking about what has been going on over the last couple of days rather than what is going on in front of your eyes, because quite frankly, you are as able to interpret what is going on at this moment as we are, and as soon as we see even the first glimpse of Jessica McClure, we will stop talking. We will just let you see and listen to what is going on. Up until a few moments ago, that is until just before we came on the air, there were periodic shots on the various live cameras, and I should use this opportunity to thank our affiliates and our good friends at KTRK in Houston and WFAA in Dallas, Texas. It is their cameras on the scene, their live remote units that are sending you these live pictures that you're watching right now. Until just a few moments ago, we were watching the parents of Jessica McClure, and they are very, very young people themselves. Reba Gail McClure, the mother, is only 17, and Chip McClure, the father, is 18. And they were sitting there talking with some of the rescue workers, talking with some of the police, and then just before we came on the air, in fact, it was probably what galvanized us into motion and made us believe that perhaps things were happening a little bit more quickly than they are. They were whisked away. I'm not sure if they have left the scene altogether or if they've been taken to the ambulance so that they will already be in the ambulance and they can just move that little girl through there into the ambulance and get the whole family out of there as quickly as possible without running the risk of their being impeded by all kinds of well-meaning but perhaps over-eager reporters and photographers and well-wishers and friends. You can see what I was just seeing, and that is the cable slipping, that steel cable slipping ever so slowly but gradually past the gloved thumb of one of the rescue workers. The indication that something is being brought up. There it is, the cable still moving. We can only infer at this point that what is being raised is the rescue worker together with that little stretcher holding 18-month-old Jessica McClure. Mike?
Ted, they have been using that line that's going down into the hole constantly through this. Men have been working in 20 to 45-minute shifts, and when they were drilling initially, it could only be one man at a time with a jackhammer, and they would just stay down there till they couldn't take it anymore. And when they would come up, some would collapse, they couldn't stand. But one man after another, some of them without a great deal of experience, others with an awful lot of experience, helped. I'm beginning to hear a cheer or two now. Let's listen. Ted, they sound deliriously happy here. I don't know whether it came across there, but it's just absolutely electric. People have the biggest grins I've ever seen. What we can't see, at least I can't from my vantage point, is how she is. How does she look?
Well, Mike, as I said to our audience before, sometimes you're in this curious situation where someone who's 50 feet from the action can't see as much as people who are 1,000 miles away. Let's just let the pictures speak for themselves. The camera has a wonderful close-up of Jessica. She looks obviously kind of uncomfortable because her arm is literally strapped with bandages to her face, but she is also clearly alive and apparently well.
Ted, she just walked within about 3 feet of me. It does look like one badly bruised girl. Let's just hope she can make it. She had some very rough scars, some very rough bruises, but I guess that's what you'd expect from being in the bottom of a 20-foot well for 2.5 days.
Well, Mike, we are seeing some obviously very relieved and very gratified rescue workers, friends, neighbors, policemen, health workers. The important thing is that little girl is out of the well. She is in the ambulance. I assume that ambulance has already left, that the parents are with them. This is one of those very rare times when we are able to focus on a story that has captivated the nation and say there has indeed been a happy ending. We will continue to keep you up to date on this story. Big cheers now for one of the rescue workers who was down at the bottom of that shaft, who obviously enabled them to pull Jessica out of the hole. A lot of congratulations to go around, a lot of thanks to be given, and we will, of course, keep you up to date on this story as soon as we hear more about Jessica McClure's condition, and should we hear anything from members of the family or those who were involved in the rescue attempt. It is a happy ending to a very long, arduous, difficult story, and what more can we say? For my colleague, Mike Von Friend, in Midland, Texas, I'm Ted Koppel. We'll see you later in the evening.
This special report came to you from ABC News. We now resume our regular program schedule.
So just listen to a piece of this. So you can see from that there was anticipation. There was a sense of hope that this was going to have a positive resolution, and in fact it did. That gentleman in the middle of the screen with the orange hat, his name is Robert O'Donnell. He's the rescuer, the paramedic who actually went down into the hole. He went into this hole, which was 25 feet long, very tight, very little room to move, very dark. He had a flashlight. That was the only way he could see. The first time he went down this hole, he was not able to extricate Jessica. She was stuck too much, came out. They were supposed to send another person down. He insisted on going down, went down and rescued her. And obviously from his face, you can tell this was a magic moment. It was, this 18-month-old girl is now safe. Everyone across the country is elated. It's just a really positive time. One would think that this would be a really hopeful encounter for this paramedic after saving this girl. Well, over the next 8 years, it in fact wasn't a very hopeful situation. I did mention that even positive stress can be difficult to manage. This was not positive stress that she was saved. It was also very stressful for him to be in that environment where he was 25 feet deep in a very tight hole trying to get this little girl out. Over the next 8 years, Mr. O'Donnell had more and more difficulty at work, more difficulty dealing with his peers, more difficulty keeping a job. His peers often described him as a, quote, publicity hound. He was married, had a child, divorced, showed excessive alcohol use, ultimately lost his home because he was unable to keep a job, and in 1995 ultimately committed suicide. There are varied accounts, but in large part, much of this is considered to come from the stress related to this incident, which was never addressed. There was no assistance for Mr. O'Donnell beyond his family, and his suicide note, in fact, said that. I didn't get any help from anyone except my family. So that's one situation. This is Sandy Hook Elementary School. This is what Sandy Hook Elementary School might have looked like the morning before the shootings actually happened. And this is what Sandy Hook looked like as children were evacuated from the school to get away from the gunman. This is an incident of critical stress, an overwhelming incident. Just as a reminder, there were 20 6- and 7-year-old students who were killed by the gunman, and 6 adults. This is an incident where you have multiple types of first responders, and I mentioned teachers could be first responders. In fact, teachers became first responders in trying to protect the children. But aside from the teachers, you have police and fire, EMS first responders, who are trained first responders, who were dealing with this situation. This was a traumatic situation, as you can imagine, and just a couple of quotes that I was able to gather from first responders who were on the scene. One first responder said, "I saw the faces of the SWAT team guys coming out. When they came out of the building, they were breaking down crying, saying they'd never seen anything like this before in their life." You have firefighters and EMTs who when they're asked about their reaction, one reaction was, quote, "Most of my emotions are guilt. Guilt because we weren't able to do something. Guilt for all of the praise we're getting for being here. It doesn't feel good when people say nice things to me. It feels good for a second, and then you feel guilty for feeling good." So first responders can, while first responders can have difficulty with the stress they're seeing, and seeing these children killed was obviously stressful, but the fact that you can't do anything in and of itself can be stressful. And I don't need to say much about this. It's obviously the most horrific mass casualty event this country has ever seen on the mainland United States. But again, in addition to those of us who watched it on TV, our first responders who were there. You saw the picture in the last module of first responders going up into the tower. Now, whether they knew that they would have trouble coming down or not, we don't know. But they were going up into the tower. They were trying to rescue people. After the towers collapsed, firefighters were continuing to dig on what they referred to as the pile, the rubble, continuing to dig, looking for civilian survivors, but even more importantly, trying to find their friends and their colleagues to see if any of them had survived. And this is an event that touched me most personally. This happened in December of 1999. I remember this vividly. I was working that night, and we listened to the transmissions from the Worcester dispatch that we could hear on our radio. We couldn't hear the dispatches coming from the field. And personally, it was the most helpless and overwhelming feeling that I've ever experienced. This was a cold storage building caught on fire. 2 homeless people were reportedly trapped, and firefighters were working in and around this scene. Listening to the audio of the incident that went on for hours and hours and hours, it's pretty obvious that this was just a typical fire. There was nothing particularly different about this fire until the whole fire just became a catastrophic event. It began with one of the back walls collapsing. The rescue crews looking for the survivors, the homeless people. The rescue crews became separated, and the first call was for 2 missing firefighters in the building. A second crew of firefighters went in from the back to look for their colleagues. Those 2 firefighters became disoriented and trapped and radioed for help because they couldn't find their way out. A third set of 2 firefighters was sent in to find the first 2 groups of firefighters. They also became disoriented and lost. And more firefighters tried to go into the building to save their colleagues, even though there were now 6 missing firefighters in the fire. The chief had to physically restrain firefighters from going into the building to save their colleagues, who at that point were likely already dead. But what made it so overwhelming, aside from the loss of 6 firefighters and the image of firefighters still trying to go into this building to find their colleagues, was having the opportunity to go to the funeral about a week later. There were 30,000 police and firefighters in Worcester. Now, Worcester being a large city, noisy city, there were 30,000 firefighters who marched about a mile to the funeral services. I was part of that procession, and it was the first time I've ever seen over 30,000 people and have no sound. The only sound were the boots hitting the ground. The sides were packed with spectators paying their respects. Not one made a sound. It was the eeriest experience I've ever had. So, and these are the 6 men who died in the fire. And the story that Denis Leary told in the very first episode to the new recruits in the FDNY that I showed you, some of those stories were true to 9/11. Some of them were true to this event, in that there were firefighters that the only way they could identify the firefighters was by a belt buckle or a helmet or a piece of equipment. And if you can imagine first responders who are often feeling told they're invincible, they're our heroes, they're the ones who come when things go bad. Just imagine how firefighters felt in a situation like this. Imagine how police officers would feel in a similar situation. This is a case that happened here in New Hampshire. Gary Dion is a firefighter and EMT in Londonderry. He had been on the job about 15 years. He and his wife have been married that entire time. Pretty volatile relationship. They both drank quite a bit. She more than him. One Sunday afternoon, she was intoxicated, threatened him with a shotgun. He ultimately shot and killed her. The reason I put this here, and the full report from the Attorney General's office is there that you can take a look at and get more information. But the reason I put this here is for a very simple question. How much of this was caused by the stress of his work? How much of this was caused by his stress reaction, and how much did that impact his wife? Now, it is entirely possible that this was just totally separate situation, that there was no impact from the stress, that she wasn't impacted by his stress, that the relationship wasn't impacted. But it's more likely that much of what happened between them in terms of the volatility of the relationship, the fighting, the drinking, that much of that had to do with the stress that was unresolved from his work as a firefighter and an EMT. So I'm going to stop there. I have a couple of slides that I'll do in a second shorter lecture, but just this will give you a chance to take a break rather than just pushing through on all of this.